Something is happening right now that the mainstream tech press is barely covering, and that Microsoft absolutely does not want to be the headline story of 2025 and 2026. Millions of people are walking away from Windows, not out of frustration after a bad update, not because a tech YouTuber told them to, but because after years of decisions that have slowly eroded the relationship between Microsoft and the people actually sitting at Windows computers every day, a breaking point has been reached, and the numbers behind it are not small. They are not a rounding error. They are a trend line that is accelerating in a direction Microsoft has never seen before on the desktop. I spent weeks going through verified market data, independent research, documented government decisions, and real user migration reports to put together what you're about to watch. And what I found is not a story about Linux suddenly becoming perfect. It is a story about Windows becoming something that a growing number of people no longer want to use. Those are two very different things, and understanding the difference is how you understand why this exodus is real, why it is growing, and what it actually means for you sitting at your machine right now. Let us start with the number that puts everything in context. The numbers. That Microsoft does not want you to see Linux desktop market share reached 7% globally in 2025, marking a 70% increase from the 76% recorded in July 2022. That is not a slow organic drift, that is acceleration. The United States crossed the 5% threshold for the first time in June 2025, according to StatCounter data. Now, before you say 5% sounds small, let me put that in perspective. We are talking about hundreds of millions of desktop computers in active use globally. A 70% increase in 3 years on a platform that has been written off as a hobbyist curiosity for 2 decades is not a footnote. It is a signal. And the signal is getting louder. It took 8 years for Linux to go from 1% to 2% desktop market share. The transition from 2% to 3% took only 2 years. From 3% to 4% took just 0. 7 years. The curve is not linear. It is compressing. And the conditions driving it right now are more powerful than anything that has pushed Linux adoption before. The Steam survey reported 0.05% Linux users among gamers in October 2025, a 52% increase from October 2024. That number matters specifically because gaming has historically been the single biggest reason people stayed on Windows. The argument was always, you can switch to Linux for productivity, but if you game, you need Windows. That argument is falling apart in real time. We will get to exactly why in a moment. Industry analysts project the global Linux operating system market to grow from $97 billion in 2024 to $69 billion by 2032, representing a compound annual growth rate of 29%. That is not a niche market. That is a market on the edge of mainstream breakout. And it is being driven by a set of specific, documented, identifiable reasons that have nothing to do with Linux evangelism and everything to do with what Microsoft has been doing to Windows. Reason 1, Microsoft killed Windows 10 and locked millions out of Windows 11. Windows 10 reached end of support on October 14, 2025. After that date, computers running Windows 10 no longer receive security updates, technical support, or feature fixes from Microsoft. On the surface, that sounds routine. Operating systems age out, versions get replaced. That is normal. What is not normal is what happened next. Whilst some Windows 10 users took heed of the deadline and were keen to upgrade, they found themselves unable to do so due to the new hardware requirements Windows 11 introduced, such as TPM2, 0, UEFI, and support for secure boot. Let that sit for a moment. Microsoft end-of-lifed an operating system running on hundreds of millions of perfectly functional computers, and then told the owners of those machines that their hardware did not qualify for the upgrade. Not because the hardware could not run Windows 11 from a performance standpoint. The machines were fast enough. They had the RAM. They had the storage. They simply did not have TPM2. 0, a security chip requirement that had nothing to do with whether the computer could run the software. Millions of users found themselves with a machine that was suddenly cut off from security updates, facing a choice between buying a new computer, paying for extended security updates, or finding another solution. A significant portion of them found Linux. A laptop that Windows 11 struggles to run smoothly can feel fast and responsive on Linux Mint. An older desktop that Microsoft has declared incompatible with Windows 11 can run a modern, secure, fully supported Linux distribution indefinitely. For schools, small businesses, and budget-conscious households, this is not a minor advantage. This is the first driver of the exodus, and it is enormous in scale. Microsoft created a cliff. Millions of users, rather than jumping off the edge to buy new hardware, turned around and walked in a different direction entirely. Reason 2, Windows recall. The privacy controversy that refused to go away. If the hardware requirements situation planted the seed of doubt in millions of users' minds about Microsoft's priorities, what came next in May 2024 watered it aggressively. Microsoft announced Recall as part of its push to deeply integrate AI into Windows 11. The feature is designed to act like a photographic memory of your computer activity by automatically capturing screenshots of your entire screen every few seconds. These images are then stored in a centralized, searchable database, allowing you to find past tasks, conversations, or documents by looking back at what you were doing. The announcement triggered immediate public backlash. Privacy experts and users alike raised serious concerns about the implications of continuously capturing everything on users' screens, including sensitive information like passwords, private chats, banking data, and confidential work files. Many pointed out that Recall's data collection is broad, persistent, and operates without meaningful user consent or granular controls to limit what is captured. Security researchers did not wait to find out whether the concerns were theoretical. They tested it. What they found was alarming. Recall's original implementation did not protect its databases, creating what security researchers called an easily accessible treasure trove for malware. In other words, Microsoft had built a feature that took screenshots of your entire digital life every few seconds and stored them in a local database that was not encrypted and could be read by malicious software. The backlash was swift and broad enough that Microsoft was forced to pull the feature entirely before its initial launch. Microsoft delayed its rollout for over 1 year to address critical user concerns after being branded a security nightmare and a hacker's paradise by cybersecurity experts. When Recall returned in April 2025 with security improvements, the story did not end. The University of Pennsylvania's Office of Information Security released a warning stating that Recall introduces substantial and unacceptable security, legality, and privacy challenges, and strongly urged administrators of Windows environments to disable the feature. New security concerns were unearthed, and Microsoft's Windows Recall controversy continued with fresh vulnerabilities identified by researchers, despite Microsoft's denials of any data risk. For a large number of Windows users, Recall was not just a bad feature, it was a demonstration of intent. It showed what Microsoft wanted Windows to become, an operating system that watches what you do, records it, indexes it, and makes it searchable, all in service of an AI vision that prioritizes Microsoft's product roadmap over user privacy. Even after years of pushback, Recall continued resurfacing in preview builds, signaling Microsoft's intent to fully deploy what critics describe as a dangerously invasive surveillance mechanism. The trust damage from this episode reached people who had never previously considered switching operating systems. For many of them, Linux suddenly looked less like a technical challenge and more like a reasonable escape route. Reason 3. Windows. 11 is doing things. Users never agreed to Recall is the most dramatic example, but it is not an isolated incident. It fits into a broader pattern that has been building inside Windows 11 since its release, a pattern of Microsoft making decisions that serve Microsoft's interests at the direct expense of the user sitting in front of the screen. Microsoft faced mounting backlash over aggressive AI integrations across Windows 11. The company had been pushing Copilot buttons into applications like Notepad and Paint, embedding AI features into the operating system at a pace that users openly rejected. An announcement about an Agentic OS in November generated thousands of overwhelmingly negative replies. The Start menu has been progressively filled with advertising. Applications that users never installed appear as recommendations. Settings that users configure get reset after updates. Telemetry data collection runs persistently in the background, and many diagnostic and usage data settings cannot be fully disabled on consumer versions of Windows. These are not isolated complaints from power users who want granular control. They are systematic decisions that have accumulated over years into a user experience that an increasing number of people describe as an operating system that is working for Microsoft rather than for them. And when users started asking the obvious question, what is the alternative? They found that the alternative had gotten significantly better since the last time anyone checked. Reason 4. Linux gaming is no longer a compromise. For the longest time, the single most effective argument for staying on Windows was this: if you play games, you need Windows, full stop. The gaming library, the anti-cheat support, the driver optimization, all of it pointed in one direction. That was true for years. It is no longer true in the same way, and the technology responsible for changing it is called Proton. Proton is a compatibility layer developed by Valve in cooperation with Codeweavers that allows Windows software, primarily video games, to run on Linux-based operating systems. Proton generally has better compatibility than upstream Wine due to additional patches and components, and many Windows games beyond the official compatibility list work with Proton. The Steam Deck changed everything. When Valve shipped a handheld gaming device running Linux and needed it to play the entire Steam library, they poured serious engineering resources into making Proton work. The result was compatibility improvements that then flowed directly back to desktop Linux users. What was once a niche pursuit requiring significant technical skill and patience has become a realistic daily driver for thousands of PC gamers. SteamOS accounts for approximately 30% of all Linux gaming systems, reflecting the Steam Deck's direct impact on broader Linux gaming adoption. And the work continues at pace. Proton 11 is based on Wine 11 and introduces NT-Sync kernel driver support, moving parts of the NT synchronization model directly into the Linux kernel, improving Proton's ability to run Windows software more reliably and potentially reducing CPU overhead and improving frame rate consistency. Is every Windows game perfectly playable on Linux today? No. There are still titles, particularly those with aggressive kernel-level anti-cheat systems, that remain problematic. But the honest answer in 2025 and into 2026 is that for the vast majority of the Steam library, and for single-player and cooperative games specifically, Linux gaming is not a compromise anymore. It is a viable platform. And for the millions of users who were already on the edge of leaving Windows, removing the gaming barrier was the final thing they needed. Reason 5. Governments and institutions are leading the way. The migration from Windows to Linux is not only happening at the individual level, it is happening at the institutional level in ways that are historically significant and are actively validating the decision for millions of ordinary users watching from the sidelines. Germany's state of Schleswig-Holstein became the first in Europe to completely replace Microsoft tools with Linux and LibreOffice in public offices as of April 2024. This was not a pilot program. This was a complete replacement across a government infrastructure at scale. Denmark's Ministry of Digital Affairs announced a transition from Microsoft to open source platforms. France operates over 103,000 computers running Gendbuntu, a custom Ubuntu-based distribution used by the National Gendarmerie. The motivations behind these decisions are strategic as well as economic. By adopting Linux, governments gain flexibility. They are not tied to one company, can choose from a wide range of service providers, and can invest in their own developers and companies rather than sending money abroad for licenses. When governments with the resources to use any operating system they want choose Linux, it changes the conversation. It removes the stigma. It makes the question of switching feel less radical and more reasonable. And for individual users watching these decisions play out in the news, it answers a question they might have had. Is this a fringe thing, or is this legitimate? Governments switching 30,000 machines to Linux is about as far from fringe as you can get. Linux powers 3% of web-facing servers in 2025. Government data centers worldwide report 64. 9% Linux adoption. Among Fortune 500 companies, 72. 6% run mission-critical workloads on Linux. The infrastructure of the modern internet already runs on Linux. The enterprise backbone already runs on Linux. The desktop is the last frontier, and it is moving. Reason 6. The performance and hardware. Efficiency. Advantage is real. There's a practical argument for Linux that does not get nearly enough attention in these conversations, and it is this. Linux is faster than Windows 11 on the same hardware. Not slightly faster in synthetic benchmarks, meaningfully faster in everyday use, particularly on older machines. Since a Linux PC generally runs faster than Windows 11 on the same hardware, switching to Linux can offer genuine performance relief without spending a dime on new components. This matters enormously in the current hardware market. DRAM prices have surged dramatically. DDR5 RAM kits that cost around $100 in mid-2025 are now approaching $200. SSD prices are rising steeply, and GPU prices are climbing. There is no clear timeline for when prices will stabilize, making any hardware upgrade a serious financial burden. Linux runs efficiently. It does not require the continuous background processes that Windows maintains for telemetry, Copilot integration, update management, and the various services Microsoft runs in the background of every Windows session. A machine that runs Windows 11 at the edge of its capability frequently runs a modern Linux distribution with headroom to spare, for users who cannot afford or do not want to upgrade their hardware. This is not a minor technical footnote. It is a compelling economic reason to switch. Linux malware detections accounted for only 3% of all OS-targeted malware reported in 2025. On the security side, Linux's smaller desktop footprint means it is a dramatically less targeted platform for the ransomware and malware ecosystem that makes Windows management so demanding. The combination of better performance on existing hardware and a significantly smaller attack surface is a genuinely powerful value proposition that did not exist in this form even 5 years ago. who is actually switching and what are they using, the picture of who is switching to Linux in 2025 is not what it was a decade ago. It used to be primarily developers and system administrators who ran Linux because their work demanded it. That demographic is still there and growing, but it no longer describes the majority of new Linux desktop users. The Stack Overflow developer survey 2025 found that 8% of developers use Ubuntu for personal use and 7% for professional use. But beyond the developer community, the new wave of Linux adopters includes everyday users who hit the Windows 10 end-of-life wall, users who read about recall and made a decision about their own privacy, gamers who tried Proton and found it worked for their library, and users who are simply tired of an operating system that feels increasingly like a platform for Microsoft's business interests, rather than a tool for their own productivity. The distributions absorbing most of this new user base are the ones with the lowest barrier to entry. Ubuntu and Linux Mint consistently rank as the most recommended starting points for users switching from Windows, primarily because the installation process is straightforward. The interface is familiar enough to not require complete relearning, and the software availability through package managers covers the vast majority of what everyday users need. For gaming specifically, distributions like Nobara Linux, which is a Fedora-based distribution specifically optimized for gaming workloads, and Pop! OS, which is Ubuntu-based with excellent out-of-the-box driver support for NVIDIA hardware, have become increasingly popular among the gaming-oriented side of the migration. India leads major economies with a 21% Linux adoption rate, reflecting the country's growing developer community, educational initiatives, and cost-sensitive consumer base. The cost factor cannot be overstated in global context. Linux is free. The software ecosystem around it is overwhelmingly free. LibreOffice replaces Microsoft Office. GIMP and Kdenlive replace expensive creative tools. For users in markets where software licensing costs represent a significant portion of income, Linux is not just an alternative. It is the only rational choice. What Linux cannot do yet, and why that is changing. This script would not be honest if it did not address the real limitations that remain. Linux is not a perfect Windows replacement for every user in every situation, and overstating the case does not serve anyone making a genuine decision about switching. The most significant remaining friction point is software compatibility for niche professional applications. Adobe's Creative Suite, specifically Photoshop, Premiere Pro, and After Effects in their full native form, does not run on Linux. AutoCAD has no native Linux version. Certain specialized industry applications, particularly in fields like engineering, finance, and medical imaging, are Windows only by design or by licensing agreement. For those specific users, the choice is more complicated and may still reasonably land on Windows or macOS as the practical answer. But it is important to note the direction of travel. The web-based alternative ecosystem has matured to the point where browser-based tools cover an increasing percentage of what those professional applications do. Figma has replaced significant portions of Photoshop's use case for design work. DaVinci Resolve has a full native Linux version and is a professional-grade video editing suite. Blender, one of the most capable 3D creation tools in existence, runs natively on Linux and is free. The gap is narrowing every year, and for the majority of users whose needs center around productivity, communication, web browsing, content consumption, and gaming, the gap has already effectively closed. The decision in front of you right now. If you are watching this channel, you care about hardware, you care about where your money goes, and you care about what the technology you use every day is actually doing to serve you versus serving the company that made it. Those are the exact right questions to be asking right now. The Windows Exodus is not a fringe movement. It is not an ideological rebellion by people who hate Microsoft for sport. It is a rational response by millions of users to a clear set of documented decisions that Microsoft made about the direction of Windows, the hardware requirements that locked out functional machines, the recall feature that captured screenshots of users' entire digital lives without adequate protection, the persistent advertising inside the operating system, the telemetry that cannot be fully disabled, the AI integrations pushed in faster than users consented to receive them. Behind each percentage point of Linux market, share growth is a real person who made a deliberate decision to stop paying for an operating system that was increasingly working against them and to try something built differently. Whether you are ready to make that switch today, whether you want to run Linux alongside Windows in a dual boot setup, or whether you simply want to understand what is driving one of the most significant shifts in desktop computing in the last 20 years, the most important thing is that you are making an informed decision rather than a default one. The storm that has been building in the Windows ecosystem did not appear overnight. It has been forming for years. What 2025 showed is that a meaningful number of people have decided they would rather find shelter somewhere else than keep waiting for it to pass. The shelter has gotten a lot better, and the storm inside Windows shows no signs of clearing.